There's been one piece of news that has absolutely blown up the wrestling world over the last week. It is, of course, the breaking story that Daniel Bryan and possibly CM Punk are headed to AEW. And for one of those guys, it looks like it may be official. And today we're very happy to bring in the man who broke that story, Cassidy Haynes of Bodyslam.net. Cassidy, you have been all over the internet talking about this story for the last 7 days. It has been probably the biggest thing going in wrestling over that time. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us here on Pro Wrestling Musings. And if you would, could you just summarize everything that you know right now about Daniel Bryan and CM Punk when it comes to AEW?
Sure, man, no problem. And thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. But yeah, it's been a pretty crazy week. As far as pretty much everything's out there that I know. I was told about Daniel Bryan's signing and that it had already happened. And like I said, they gave me I don't know if they say demands, but what he had asked for as far as like what he required to sign. And that was, comparable date or comparable money for less dates. So he wanted a lighter schedule, but wanted, equal money to what he was making, I guess, before in WWE. And the main seller was that he was really, really wanted to work Japan. So a lot of it was hinging on who kind of worked out that Japanese deal or who was going to let him go work in Japan as well. And that obviously looks like it's going to be AEW there. And then he wanted creative input. And everybody kind of twisted what I said there a little bit, like that he was getting creative control because nobody gets creative control in AEW. It all goes through Tony, but it's input. He wants creative input. He doesn't have the control of it. It's not WCW in the late 90s. But, yeah, he gets, an input on what, he feels is best for his character, which is, not too far-fetched. That happens with a lot of these guys now. But, yeah, as far as control goes, he doesn't have any control. It's just input. But that was the main signing points there that he required, and he got all of them, is what I was told. And then the plan, of course, they told me the plan tentatively at the time was to have him come in at Arthur Ashe on the 22nd of September. Mm-hmm. But since then, since all that was worked out, this Punk stuff came up too. So that kind of made them decide to reshuffle and reformat and try to figure out the best plan of attack here, because now you have an extra huge new debut to work into your plans. And it, they were going through the whole, who do we use when these people come in, who's going to be involved, where is the best place for everybody to come in. And it's, just trying to figure out how they needed to capitalize off this buzz, because obviously this has been the most talked about stuff on the internet and in wrestling in the last week. So, they kind of got a little bit of replanning to do, but everything I had heard was Arthur Ashe. And then Punk, they told me Tony wants him for Chicago, 100%, that's where his plan is going to come in. And as far as what they said there was not if Punk is going to come in for Chicago, but when he's coming in Chicago, because we have those 3 shows coming up with Rampage or Dynamite, Rampage, and then All Out. So pretty much you can just suspect Punk for Chicago, and loosely the plan was for Bryan to come back and come in and hit the Arthur Ashe show. So, which makes sense there too, because that's what Titan's backyard, it's Vince's backyard in New York area. So to have a big surprise like that in New York just kind of feels like what I would do if it was me.
Yeah, that would make sense. So you have a news story that you released over the last day talking about Tony Khan and AEW EVPs flying to Chicago on a private jet. Can you talk a little bit about what's in that story? Yeah,
I the other night I got a source gave me a little scoop and something to dig in on about Tony's private jet flying into Chicago, and that it was rumored that they were flying in with the EVPs to shoot some promo footage for possibly the United Center announcement, which a lot of us will keep hearing that there's an announcement coming, and everybody was like, oh, is this going to be talent related? What's it going to be? But this is before any of the Daniel Bryan stuff really came out. We heard the next big announcement was like an event or a venue or another show. Mm-hmm. And it was supposed to be a bigger one. So that's what everybody was, thinking that was going to be. So that's kind of what the United Center checked out. But so I ran the story yesterday, and then within a couple hours, AEW reaches out to me with the correction on it. Says that Tony wasn't on the flight. He was at the fights this weekend for Paige Van Zandt fight instead. He didn't go to Chicago. So I ran the update. Apparently, Tony and the EVPs didn't go to Chicago, but the plane did. They confirmed the plane did. But for me, what the most interesting part of that whole thing is, and I think everybody should pay attention to, is that AEW reached out to me to correct that story. Nothing else in the last week, but just to correct that the flight that Tony and the EVPs weren't on the flight. So take that as you will. I think that's the most interesting thing for me this week, is that everything I've written, the only thing that they were like, hey, I think you might want to get the real info here, is this thing on the flight. So,
and you double checked with them, right? You were like, is there anything else that you want me to potentially take care of?
I asked, I was like, all right, so I've got the information correct. Once they told me what was going on with this flight, I was like, is it anything else that I need to change? Anything else that I've worked on that I need to update? And they said, no, we just wanted to give you a heads up on that they weren't on that flight. So it's like, okay, thank you. And went with the update on that. But I mean, they didn't, we didn't talk about it specifically, but I figured if they had any issues, they probably would have addressed it there when they reached out to me to make a correction yesterday on that.
Well, definitely. I mean, that to me is probably the most interesting part of that whole thing. We have another Pro Wrestling Musings writer here, and for those of you that have been listening to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast at all, it should be no surprise to you that Anthony from PWM has been hanging on every word of this report. Anthony is our local social media guru, I guess I should say. Anthony is everywhere, and so this has been a really interesting thing for him to follow. So Anthony, thank you for joining us, and I would like you to add your particular brand of social media knowledge to this conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, Griff, and thank you very much, Cassidy, for coming on as well. We really do honestly appreciate it. So I guess my side of questioning is more in regards to what it's like for you when you're sort of breaking this sort of a story, because obviously you've had a lot of people touching this story, a lot of places. You've got other places like Fightful, Wrestle Talk, the guys at Cultaholic and all that, all, taking your story and sort of using it. And sometimes we see that story sort of change a little bit, or things get added that maybe you haven't added. So do you find yourself having to, I guess, contact these other guys and say, hey, you've kind of gotten it wrong what I've said? I know that there was some stuff come from your trip to the Destruction podcast, which is where I actually heard you explain this whole story the first time on that podcast, and it was absolutely a great time. But I know that there was some sort of, I think someone came onto Reddit and put incorrect information on Reddit. So I guess how much of your time has been used, I guess, spending time on this sort of a story?
Oh man, if you sat there and tried to correct every person that took what you said slightly out of context, you would never straighten the internet out. But that was interesting though, because they twisted what I said down around just a little bit. What I was trying to imply with what I was saying on the Distraction was there was a bunch of things I'd heard which hadn't come out yet. So like the venue announcement and the big event stuff that they were talking about, and some rumored stuff that really hasn't been able to confirm much to it other than just it's like rumored from the people that I speak to, is they were, there's a loose tentative plan to go back to the United Kingdom at some point, which is no secret because that was a plan before the pandemic when they were supposed to go for Fyter Fest last year, but the pandemic happened, so they ended up having Fyter Fest in Daly's place. And Tony told us that at a scrum following one of the pay-per-views last year, that was what they had planned. So that was some things I'd heard that were maybe tentatively being talked about for the rest of this year. After Full Gear was, maybe there's a UK trip or tour coming up, which kind of lined it up too with, the fact that Fozzie's on tour in December in the UK. So I was hearing stuff like that. So what I was saying that it's interesting hearing all these other little things of what might be happening later on in the year, knowing now that Punk and Daniel Bryan are inbound, So how much more interesting is a UK tour with those two names attached to it, or how much like the fact that they're talking about a bigger venue, possibly in Chicago, for their next run through this season or this year or the first of next year, whenever they decide to do it at a bigger venue, for the people that were like, doubted whether or not they could sell out a bigger venue than like the Sears Center or the Now Arena, whatever it's called, with those two names attached to it, like how much more how much easier would it be? So
Right.
all these things that I was hearing that were like rumblings of rumors of what might come up that I, hadn't been able to get much confirmation on other than just people have heard it. You know what I mean? It is it's just all these little things just kind of were making more sense with these big names and the big plans they had coming in. And it's just interesting to me how much more interesting those events are going to be with those names is kind of what I was trying to say. But yeah, people twist things around all the time. But as far as how this whole story came about, like, it was the most stressful thing I have ever had to do in my entire wrestling news career in my life. And I've honestly done this. So I'm 38 years old now, and I've literally started doing this when I was 15 years old under a pen name. You know what I mean? As a kid. Well, actually, I did it a little bit under my name, and then when I'm in high school, I had people come up to me in high school, be like, "Am I reading my wrestling news from you?" And I don't know, for some reason, I thought, "Oh shit, that's the last thing I need people in high school to know is I'm a wrestling news journalist nerd." So I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about," and I just disappeared and changed my pen name and went into hiding for some weird reason because I didn't want people to know it was like my identity, my secret identity online. But I guess once I grew up a little bit later, I was like, "That was stupid. Like, why was I worried about what people thought?" So I just kind of went with my real name in the last 10, 15 years, as far as people, mid 2000s on, when I came back from my little break and hiatus. But yeah, I've been doing this forever, and this is definitely the biggest thing that's ever fallen onto me. And it all kind of happened at once. So the morning that Sapp broke the CM Punk story, before he even had published the article, I was hearing everything about Punk from the night before, and then all that Daniel Bryan stuff at once. So I was, like I said, a lot of us talk, I stay in touch with a lot of these guys, our colleagues and other, journalists, and we kind of bounce stuff off each other. Have you heard this? I'm hearing this. Have you heard this? And we started kind of talking about that. And I was asking about this Punk stuff, because this is, you hear this every now and then, about Punk, like, oh, here we go. More Punk stuff. Is there anything to it? And he was like, well, I'm about to actually publish something on that right now. And I was like, oh, well, and then it kind of got a little more, there's a little more urgency in the fact that I guess I need to figure out what's going on with this Daniel Bryan stuff, because nobody had been hearing that yet. He was like, I haven't heard anything about Daniel Bryan, though. And I'm like, okay, well, I was getting it from the same place. So I was like, there's got to be something to it if you're hearing this. And then I just spent the next 12 hours, 14 hours, just, all right, who do I need to, blowing up everybody I knew, trying to get confirmation and more information and more, and little bits were coming in here and there. And I was rushing because, if Punk stuff already got out, I figured it was only a matter of time before somebody else beats me to this one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, once I finally started getting here, everything started coming together and everybody started lining up with what I was hearing. And I was confident once I was confident enough to run with it. I did, because it's one of those two where, if I'm wrong on this one, man, this is a hard one to come back from, So people that were like, how confident are you in your printing this? Blah, 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 and not believing me. I'm like, guys, you got to look at the weight of this article and this scoop that I'm laying out. This is a tough one to if by chance, I'm wrong, which I'm not, this is when you don't really come back from, because no matter what I write from here on out, people are going to be like, oh yeah, well, what about that time? Remember this? So, because that's how the internet is, you know what I mean? You report anything, is it, I'm guilty of it this weekend too. I was like, is this you? And I pulled up a quote from 1996 on somebody. So I did the same shit to somebody that I'm waiting. And it was Meltzer. I did that to Meltzer this weekend, other than what I know people could do to me. So yeah, it goes around. It'd be worth it. I'd be deserving of it, but
yep.
I'm confident in this. This is one of those that, like I said, they didn't tell me to correct it. They didn't deny it. He didn't tell me he hasn't denied it on Conan, on his show. So, I mean, this is just one of those guys that's happening. But
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for me, I think the first thing when I first saw the article was very much of a, who's this Cassidy guy? Is he a reliable source? And then I went through my reliable sources that I go to my news for normally and go, hey, okay, is this person reporting this? No. Okay, let's go to these people and ask, okay, who knows anything about this Cassidy guy? And then all of a sudden, I started seeing all these other people like Sean Rossap, a few others, but Jeremy as well, all saying, "Oh no, he's a very reliable person. He doesn't bullshit and all that." And as soon as I heard that, and then when I actually heard you say what you just said on the distraction, saying, "Oh no, if I put this out and I was wrong, I would never ever come back from it." And as soon as I heard that, I was like, well, yeah, duh. So yeah, of course you would want to be sure. So yeah, for me now, like obviously I've been coming to your website a lot more because it's one of those ones where there's just so many people out there reporting news all the time, and you're wanting to make sure that you're getting those sources. So did you get many people coming to you and saying, how reliable are you? Like, did you get that question a lot at all?
Dude, that's all you get. That's all you get. Who are you? Why should I listen to anything you say? I'm like, you don't have to, man. I don't care. But, in a couple months or whenever this shakes out, like, I'll be waiting for you to come back and tell me, sorry, buddy, but like, I can't, what does people, that's the thing too, is like, what do people want me to do to like, I can't tell you where I hear things from. That's not how news and journalism works. Like, why do people expect wrestling journalists to like constantly divulge their sources? That's the thing that I never understand. Is you get the internet wrestling journalism or wrestling news, you write a story, and then one of the first comments you see is source ? Like, guys, I'm not going to tell you where you hear shit from, because then you don't hear shit anymore. Like, are you you don't see people like other people asking like Wojciechowski or these guys for ESPN, like, so where do you hear these trade rumors for? Like, I need to know where you heard that from before I'm going to believe you. Like, no, that's not how it works. And like, I've been around doing this for a while, and if people are just now catching on, then like you're a little bit late at the party. But other guys know, like you said, Sap and my colleagues that have been around me and have watched me at these scrums for 3 years and watched me see me hanging out with people and know that I know people. People know me. I have contacts and sources in AEW. That's a known fact. Anybody that goes to these things sees me around. They see that people know me, and everybody, like, I have friends. And that's how I got into this, honestly, years and years ago. I just was a fan of wrestling and started as a kid going to shows and making friends, and all these people that I knew from when they were on the indies eventually worked their way up. And then from there you meet more people, and that's just how you do it. I grew up, with a lot of these guys that are now, have careers. And from there, you meet tons of people, and I get the opportunity to go to these media scrums, like I said, and you meet people. So there's I have sources. It's not like I can tell people who they are or where they are. So it's up to everybody to decide whether or not they're going to believe me. But if you go back and look, you can search on the website, like our exclusive news that I've put out over the years. You go back and look, man. There's very hard for people to find stuff that's wrong that I've ever put out. There's one that I can think of off the top of my head that it didn't pan out the way that I said it was going to, but I even wrote in the bottom that unless they re-sign him in 2 months, in like the next 2 months, or 2 weeks, whatever it was, things are good. Then things could change, and that's what the guy did. The contract, he leveraged a new contract from an article 3-4 years ago and got a new gig for a while. And then people were like, remember that time you missed that one? I'm like, I didn't really miss that one. It didn't.
Well, no one bats 1,000, right?
Yeah, no, and that's the only one that I can ever be like, yeah, I'll eat the loss on that one. But just because I can't prove, that what happened, because, if he admitted to what, it was a Chris Hero article years ago about how I'd wrote that when Hero when he thought that he was done wrestling and he was afraid he wasn't going to get re-signed with WWE right before they put him to UK or whatever, NXT UK, and he was doing that over there for a little bit. I wrote an article about his contract was up, and he had started reaching out and talking to people on the indies about how he might have some dates free in a couple months, and to see if there was any interest in him. And, you're not really allowed to do that. So when I was hearing about that, like, he retweets the article, of course. So why you're retweeting an article you don't want anybody to see, first of all. Right. So he retweeted it, and then, like, as his contract came up, he ended up getting re-signed. So, like, then that was even in the article, that he might get re-signed, but as of right now, this is what's happening. And of course, people don't pick up on that part. It's just the hope. Remember when you screwed up the Hero one? So it's like, technically I didn't, but I can't prove to you that it happened. And he, didn't end up on the indies in 2 months. He re-signed. So
right. Yeah,
I'll get that loss. But everything else, man, other than that one Chris Hero story 3 years ago, there's really not been anything that anybody can say that I've been wrong on.
So what I can appreciate about talking to you and reading the stuff on the site and everything is that, you know, you obviously take this seriously. You know, this isn't just like some kind of dirt sheet that's unprofessional and making stuff up, which I can always appreciate. So what I want your opinion about is something that, you know, ever since I got into the wider wrestling community, people have been debating basically since I've you know, been a part of the wrestling community, is the validity of dirt sheets themselves, and not even dirt sheets, just the idea of wrestling journalism, and people saying, well, this is entertainment, so, you know, why would I care about the journalism aspect of it? You know, journalism's for sports and news, not wrestling. And I've seen people that were annoyed and angry that you broke this story. So for you, when you do this, I don't want to, you know, force you to talk in defense of yourself, but more just an affirmative look at why what you do is valuable for people.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. This is it's a sport that people don't think is a sport, that's based on acting and predetermined, you know, endings to things. And, you know, it's like, how is this even news for some people? But it is, you know, I mean, it's a big part of our culture, and it's things. I mean, I get told a lot of things that, like, I don't report because I don't want to ruin surprises for people. You know what I mean? Like that, last week, for example, before Dynamite kicks in, I'm talking to, you know, Sapp and Zarian and Andrew Zarian and a couple of other, Jeremy from Distraction, and a couple other, you know, these guys that I talk to regularly. It's the same day that the Daniel Bryan thing came out, and they were like, I told them, I was like, hey, there's another surprise for Dynamite tonight, but we can't get it out because they don't want to ruin the surprise. Nobody wants the surprise to leak, and I don't really want to. It was Nick Gage last week. I knew about that, but, you know, I didn't put that one out there. So I pick and choose because I don't want to, for people that get mad about, you know, spoilers and stuff, like, you know, there's some things we have to put out there. Like, if I didn't put that Daniel Bryan story out there, somebody was going to, you know what I mean? Like, that one's not going to get sat on. That's too big. But, you know, there's some things you don't want to, what benefit would it have done a couple more clicks if I put out that Nick Gage stuff? But it would have, you know, burnt some bridges for me, and it would have taken away from the value of of him showing up. The Daniel Bryan thing, though, like, I know that's a bigger story than Nick Gage, but, like I said, that one's going to get out anyway. That one you can't, you know, you couldn't stop that one from coming out. As soon as somebody hears about it, somebody's going to get to it, you know. So
yeah,
I pick and choose. You know, I mean, I don't let everything out, but, you know, I try to keep some surprises and some fun for people and try to make this as fun as I can. But this is a business, man. This is a career for me. You know, I mean, this is what I do for a living. Like, I don't have another job outside of this, honestly. So, you know, I have to take it seriously, and I have to do it. I mean, that's my job. My job is to report news like anybody else. You know, there's people doing TMZ acting news. It's the same thing. You know what I mean? How is it any different than people reporting on Hollywood stuff than us or sports reporters for other, you know, things? It's, you know, it is what it is. People are going to not like it because they want to remain surprised all the time, but you're not going to keep that from, just don't read it. If you want to be, you know, like, start seeing it, don't click on it. That's how you avoid surprises, you know. But there's things that, you know, it's a responsibility. If you're in journalism, you have a responsibility to get news out there, and you know, decide what you feel is worth getting out there and when. So you just gotta be selective. You're not going to please everybody too. You got to figure that. I had to figure that out way early in this, you know, that some people are going to love you for getting stuff out there. Some people are going to hate you for getting stuff out there, and just, you know, you just got to do you, man.
So on that one as well, just obviously the idea of you guys dropping these stories, and that, obviously for me it's great to see because, you know, it's handled very much with care and, you know, and in a very professional way, which is obviously how you're wanting to have this. But I guess for me, does that ruin it for you as a obviously you have to be a fan of wrestling, so obviously you're getting these insider stories and everything. So do you yourself feel like sometimes that you get it too ruined, or do you still get surprised by sort of, I guess, things that you sort of, I guess, get don't know about?
Oh, every now and then I still get surprised, and that's great too. That's the thing about wrestling, is there's still stuff that's, you know, sneaks by a lot of us. And I forgot, there was something the other night. I was like a child, man. I had my fists up in the air. I was excited. I was pumping my fist watching something. I can't remember what it is now. Oh, it was the Malachi Black thing. You know what I mean? Like, we had heard, I mean, everybody kind of had talks, knew that he was unhappy, and it was, expected that he was probably going to go to AEW, but nobody expected him to show up on 35 days after his contract. So, I mean, there's some surprises that happen, and, I still get excited about it. But I will say this, it does take a lot of the fandom out when you have to do something for, work. You know what I mean? Like, when it's no longer a hobby and it's a job, you kind of end up, it does. Like I have a hard time enjoying WWE because, like most people, the product's not as good as it's always been, so it's harder for me to get into it. You know what I mean? Like the last week of their programming of Raw and SmackDown, I really enjoyed. Last night's Raw was honestly a little rough. Like I had a hard time watching it, and I'm a fan, and sometimes I don't even finish. I don't finish Raw. I'll come back later and DVR because I DVR and skip through stuff. Yep. And that's hard to do because that's my job. I'm supposed to cover wrestling, but like, man, sometimes I just have to. It's hard. But AEW is like, I don't want to sound like an AEW mark, but the competition and like something new to happen, and just that makes a huge difference. So the last few years have really made it more enjoyable for me. That's a fact. Like I don't want to sound like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm a shill for AEW, but what they've done is tremendously impactful on the business. Just having an alternative and just something different for us to cover every week.
Yeah. Well, you got to call it like you see it. There's obviously, you have to be honest in order to be able to do this. So it feels like it's difficult not to sort of blur the lines between fan and journalist, because you kind of, like Anthony said, and like you said, you kind of have to be a fan in order to even do this at all.
Yeah, if you're not a fan of wrestling, what are you even doing in here in the first place? And especially if you're going to write about it, like that seems, I don't understand how anybody could be anybody would do wrestling journalism or be in our like media and not a fan. Like that just isn't. I can understand for other sports and stuff like that, you know what I mean, just because like you cover it. But wrestling's a hard one. That's a different one. Like I don't think anybody that covers wrestling isn't a fan at heart. And if they might have been soured on it to where they don't like it as much as they used to, and they're real critical and they're negative. But at the core, you have to be a fan of wrestling. And that's the thing about wrestling is if it's done correctly, there's so much for everyone. There should be something for everybody in a program or a show if it's done right.
Yeah.
You should be able to hit all your bases, all your demographics if done correctly, and there should be something for everybody if it's done right. And I think AEW does a tremendous job of that.
Well,
I've actually taken people to shows, like I've dated some girls that don't watch wrestling at all, never have watched it at all, and that's always fun. I don't know if you guys know about that, but being somebody that does this for a living, and then you have like a girlfriend you're trying to like keep that's like, so you do what for a living? And like you gotta like, all right, just come with me, you'll have fun, and I've taken numerous people for the first time ever. They've never even hardly watched it on TV to a show live, and it's always an AEW show because that's just the ones that I have the best chance of going and seeing, and I enjoy the most myself going and watching live. And also WWE doesn't come around me as much here in North Carolina as they should, but then they've loved it. You know what I mean? They've gone and they found something that they found that they liked and they enjoyed. So that's like an example is this girl I dated when we went to the homecoming show in 2020. It was New Year's Day. Like, so last year, the January 1st show last year, we were at that, and it was her first time ever going to an event, and she had a blast. And right away was just enthralled with the women's wrestling. She loved it. Like, she was all in, and was a huge Nyla Rose fan from the beginning. Once of course she knew the story behind her, and that was it. She was it. All in on Nyla Rose. And then we ended up, because like I said, I have some friends that are on the roster, so I ended up hanging out with some of these guys afterwards. And then somehow we ended up at the after party, and we're in the after party with everybody drinking. And I'm like, hey, there's Tony Khan over there. Do you want to go? Let me go introduce you. You know what I mean? Because he'd done scrums with him before. And she was like, wait, what? I was like, yeah, Google him first. So I had to, I was like, Google him. So she Googled it, and she's like, 6.8, that guy's worth $6.8 billion. Like, yeah, let's go talk to him. So dragged her over there and introduced her. And I told him, I was like, she's never been to a wrestling show before, and she had a blast. And he was like, I need to talk to you. I want to talk to you. And just started, what did you like? What didn't you like? Tell me everything. I want to hear your opinion. You're the person that I want to know and talk to, which I thought was incredible. That this guy's like, this is like, he wanted to find out what a non-wrestling fan liked, what they didn't like, what her favorite part of the show was, what he, and he asked her like, what would you like to see more of? So, I mean,
wow,
that's awesome too. The owner of the company wanting to, new fans find out what they thought, and just, he's a fan. And that's what's great too about this is people, and I don't understand. That's another thing I never understand is the internet's reaction to Tony Khan being a fan of wrestling and running a wrestling company, and the whole like, oh, he's just a money mark running his own, fantasy promotion. It's like, well, yeah, like, what do you want your wrestling company owner to do and to be? Do you want him to hate it? Do you want him to not like wrestling at all? Like,
right.
You want that? Watch more WWE, I think. You know what I mean? Like, you get that where you get people handling the product that don't really know what they're doing. Like, that's why they're bringing in they bring all these non-wrestling writers, and I think it's obvious in the storylines that we've seen over the years with them and how the product comes out that it's not as much. It doesn't hit as much of the wrestling fans as a lot of other products come out lately. And I think that's to do with Tony, man. Tony loves this stuff. Like, if you ever have a conversation with him, it'll blow your mind because he'll start asking you about like, what's your favorite, Rock and Roll Express match? And they're like, okay. And then like, this is an interesting conversation. And he starts telling you about a match from 1985, and he can run down every set and every moose on the whole match and tell you about it. And you're like, damn, man, you do love this shit, Yeah. And that's wild to me. And then I'm never going to understand that criticism of him. Like, how is that bad that the guy that runs this company loves the sport? Like, probably more than you do.
Well, so you said that you've been doing this a long time. Is this a different way of running the company? Like, is this a different feeling from AEW that you've seen before? Is it a different experience being around them than what you've seen before in all your years of doing this?
Yeah, I mean, and when I was younger, like I didn't really. It was a little different, because when I was a kid, the Monday Night Wars were happening, and I went to ECW shows before they got sold up. So like, I relate to that part of it is in the crowd that you go to at AEW show. It just reminds me of the old ECW like fan base and how like how diehard and how how invested they are in the product and how they. I mean, dude, I see the same people. So I do a lot of coverage for media, So like, I went to All In, the first show that wasn't even theirs. The whole the test run, the beta, beta, whatever you want to call it, before they just to see. I was at that, and then I did Double or Nothing in Vegas, and I went to Fighter Fest in Daytona, and then I did Fight for the Fallen in Jacksonville. So I did everything leading up. I went and then back to All Out, and then I did the first show in DC, and I would see the same people. Not that all over the place. You know what I mean? And these people were traveling all over the country to watch AEW, and that ironically, so like I met somebody at the DC show. The guy that was sitting next to me. I'm up in the. I'm not even good seats. I think I bought tickets for that one, and I was up pretty high up, and the guy sitting next to me or whatever, just making conversation with him. We kept in touch on Twitter. I see that guy everywhere. Like I'm sitting with him Wednesday this week, front row at Charlotte, because he drove up from Jacksonville to go to Charlotte. And I was like, hey man, I'll sit with you front row, because I've seen these guys everywhere. And it's just, you see the same people. It's like, oh, the green shirt guy in the front row of WWE, you'll see him there. Brock Lesnar guy, all these guys you would see, the AEW has their own too. It's kind of like the, back in the day, ECW, you had those guys that were always in the front row, and they would always be there northeast. The straw hat guy with the Hawaiian shirt, the leather jacket guy with the sunglasses and long hair that kind of looked like a dollar store Howard Stern. All those guys were there, and you get the same thing. And it's just it's good to see. I love seeing it because it's good for the business.
Yeah.
The more places to work and more opportunity for employment is good for everybody. And I think you'll see. Obviously, that's been apparent now, especially with all the releases WWE's done. And then there's these places for people to go and have a much Matt Cardona, the example there, like Zack Ryder, mediocrity in WWE, never really got above the mid card title belt picture. And what he did over the weekend at GCW, I made the argument is that the heat and the reaction that he was able to draw and garner was equivalent to like the way the fans reacted to Hogan in '96, like that throwing of trash and stuff that you don't get that all the time. You know what I mean? And he's doing kind of what like Drew McIntyre was able to do, go away and have a better chance of building yourself up and making a better career outside of WWE. And maybe now you raise your stock. So
yeah,
the place you have to work better, man, you know?
So, I mean, to bring it full circle, talking about the Daniel Bryan and CM Punk news, it certainly seems as though these two guys, a big reason why they're doing what they're doing is because of AEW and because of all the changes in the wrestling landscape. It seems that in the case of CM Punk, he needed something like, and this is just complete speculation from me, from what I've been reading from you and things like that, but it seems as though he needed something like AEW to rejuvenate his passion for wrestling, that he needed a new project that he actually felt passionate about working on. And for Daniel Bryan, he needed AEW to be able to, break down the forbidden door and let him work in Japan, which is something that WWE would never have done. And certainly no other company would have done had it not been for AEW kind of pushing the boundaries with that one. So, from your perspective, do you feel like AEW and the wrestling world is a big reason why we're seeing things like, Daniel Bryan and CM Punk doing what they're doing?
100%. I mean, obviously CM Punk was never coming back to WWE. That was done. You know what I mean? Like that was just never going to happen. He did he came back to Fox, do the backstage, whatever that show was, but that's not the same. That wasn't, that was as close as that was ever going to get, obviously. And it's all about like how happy these guys are working for AEW. You've not heard one person really have anything negative to say about that work environment. And like, how many times did you hear frustrations with people that were in WWE and they weren't happy with how their work was going? And you don't hear that even from the guys at the bottom of the card in AEW and the mid card guys that are just in that level. They don't complain. They're not complaining. You don't see them going on. You just don't hear the negativity that you hear a lot of times with WWE. So I think 100% this has changed for him. Like that's why Punk's back, obviously. I mean, I thought that he was coming back soon when I saw him in Chicago for StarCast, a couple before the pandemic. I just watching him talk and just being around fans, I was like, I think he misses this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he was just so burned and done with it that he was just like, it wasn't an option until, he finally got to the point where he wanted to give it a shot again. And I think that it's the environment here that this creates. And what was circulating last week, I think I saw Malachi Black talking about one of the last times that he had talked to Brody Lee. It's when he was still in WWE and Brody was here in AEW, that he was just telling him how much he would love it here. You know what I mean? Like, y'all, you would love it here. And that's all I've ever heard from any of these guys that I've seen at these shows that have come over and talked to this. Everybody loves it. It's just the environment's a totally different environment from what they're used to. And I think that makes a big difference, man. If you aren't happy with where you're at and it takes away from your performance and how you know what I mean? I think it's a great thing for I mean, in WWE, what was it? They were phasing him out. They were phasing Daniel Bryan out they wanted to be more in the back and creative because they thought his time in the ring was done basically. And they didn't want to take the risk on his neck or whatever it was and the same thing with Christian, shit, man, they brought Christian in for that WrestleMania spot. And then they like, didn't see that he had any value after that. Like, I'm never going to understand that, They have this problem of, like, they don't have stars and they didn't build new stars, but they bring in all these old stars. And then you let one go that can work every week and that you should have kept on your program. So, and it's better I'm sure Christian's so much more happy too. Like, I haven't spoken to him. Like, I usually ask these guys questions like that when I see him and they give me off the record answers usually, or sometimes they tell me stuff that I can say on the record, but I haven't had a chance to talk to him. I'm sure he'd say the same thing about how happy he is with where he is right now and the workload and just the environment there. It's fun. If you've never been to AEW, you need to check it out, especially now they're back on the road and touring. It's something that everybody should experience. It's a fun place to be for a show. That crowd it's something else, man. It's an environment that you haven't seen in years. And like you talked to me earlier about when you asked me, like I used to go to ECW back in the day when I was a kid, and that's an environment. If you missed out on that experience, there's never going to be anything like it. But this is pretty close, and GCW is very close. Like that crowd, those guys. It's fun, man. Wrestling is fun again, and there's all these options that people have, and it's good. You know, like Matt Cardona can go do the GCW thing, and that was trending number 1 this weekend. You know, that was the most talked about things in wrestling, and shit, man, that's great. It's great for people to be able to have other options. And I think that was good for Matt Cardona to go and do this GCW thing, because now he has so much more marketability than he did when he was just kind of showing up on Impact and did those 5 one-off matches for AEW and stuff. And now, like, he's able to, what he's done, I think now creates a much more, he's much more interesting. You know what I mean? I'm more invested in what Matt Cardona does now than he did before. So yeah, all these other options outside of WWE, it's the best thing for this business, is to have the more places people have to work and the more wrestling we have to see on the more, that's what this business needs. And glad we're out of that, Vince monopolizing and buying up all the competition and try to keep everybody down. Like it was like, man, shit. It was hard when TNA was the only real competition, right? I mean, that was a tough era, even though there was a lot of good stuff that happened that people didn't see and didn't watch because of the fact that it was TNA.
Yeah.
So, but no, man, it's exciting. I got a lot of trips that are coming up soon too for it, and that was the thing too. Is like, now that everybody's back on the road, I was excited about it, but man, this shit gets expensive, especially like. I am the media outlet, so like I don't have my boss paying for me to go cover this stuff. I am the boss, so it's like, damn, man, I got so many trips to go cover for these shows coming up, but it's so worth it, man. It's so worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking about what's coming up, I guess one of the questions I have is, what are your plans for obviously the future, not only of your site, but for yourself, obviously? Are you planning on sort of, I guess, maybe looking at extending things into reviews and that? Are you looking at doing things like Patreons, Twitch, all that fun stuff? What's the future of Bodyslam Net?
I honestly have kind of tried to stay away from the paywall thing. And it's not because I have a problem with people that do it. Like, I don't have any problem with Patreon and stuff. It's just I feel like the pressure to make it, I would be under to make that worth your money. I don't want that pressure right now. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I've had a lot come out this last week, so I feel like, okay, well, this would be a week I could probably feel like I could justify news if I gave everybody like a chance to read it first on the Patreon, but there's not going to always be weeks like that. You know what I mean? And I don't want to feel like I'm not, providing people with enough content and information and service to feel like that justifies their, $5 a month or whatever the hell it is. Like, that's not even much for some people, but still, like, I can, if I do it correctly, like, I can make that $5 back on the website just off traffic instead of, having to get you behind a pay service. And also I just don't have enough help and content to put out to do Patreon, I don't think, right yet. And I have plans. I've been trying to, and bring in more people to, write articles and do video content and stuff like that. So, maybe down the line, that's a plan. But for right now, Bodyslam will stay a free service. That's just kind of how I see it. I had no problem with, like I said, with pay things. I subscribe to many of them, many of these, so it's good. Everybody's got a different thing. It's just right now, we're too small, It's just me and like 2 writers that help out a little bit. And yeah, for right now, I don't think that I could justify doing a Patreon, but we do have a Twitch, but I don't use it very much. Cause like I was telling you guys, I'm not the best with technology. Like I sent a tweet out the other day about like, hey, anybody that wants to help make my podcast not look like amateur hour, let me know. Cause like, I don't know how to do any of it, man. I was like looking at stuff the other day for the first time, trying to figure out how to like use these streaming, like StreamYard and all these things that people use to put up their podcasts. And I'm like, oh, I'm so behind on all this. I made a joke to you before we got on the air. Like I all of a sudden turned into everybody's grandpa when they were a kid that couldn't make the VCR stop flashing 12 o'clock. You know, I'm that guy that doesn't know how to do anything now. But you know, I'm hoping to bring in some more people. Like we did do some more reviews and things like that, you know, before. But it's just, hopefully we'll have more people that can consistently fill things like that. But you know, we're a little hit and miss on the reviews right now. But I do a lot. I do try to do a lot of live reviews for the shows I go to and try to cover if I can get to it. And I do a lot of that. So hopefully I'll be able to provide a lot of like reviews and coverage from the events I'm going to. So I'll be at Fight for the Fallen this week, and then I'll be at Homecoming next week for AEW in Jacksonville. And then I got a couple weeks off before the week of Chicago, so I should be there for all three of those Chicago shows. Should go to Arthur Ashe in New York. In theory, I should be at that, and then Full Gear. So I've got a bunch of like traveling and stuff like that. Not to mention the local indie here in North Carolina that I try to go see, PWX. I try to go see them as often as I can. They put on a fantastic show. They brought a bunch of people in, this weekend from AEW, but I didn't get to go to that one. It was on a Saturday, and it was just a busy work week, man. I had like 6 interviews on a Saturday for podcasts, and by the time I finished, I was just not able to go. But no, anybody that wants to participate and help out, man, like always feel free to contact the site. We're always looking to add people. You know, whatever anybody wants to do, we'll take it on.
It's got to be tough at this point to, you know, think about the future in that regard, because it's such a crowded space when it comes to podcasts and reviews and all of that stuff that we've come to expect. But it definitely seems like your strength, at least for you personally, is in making those personal connections and you know, knowing people and doing all these things that, you know, you've been talking to us for 45 minutes about doing. So it's got to be tough for you to think about expanding when your particular skill set is such a personal one.
Yeah, that's always what I've been good at, is like the networking end of it, and the interaction, the human interaction of it. And that's what I was good at in school. I went to school for film and video production, which obviously I'm not using very well because I can't even make my podcast look not the most like bush league thing ever. But I ended up pivoting and doing this. But when I did that in school, like that was what I was good at. Is they always made me the production. Like she would hand me the things like, you're the producer, you make sure everybody does what they need to do, and then you work on all the other things we need to do. Like I need music for this, so find people that can do music and find somebody that can do that. So I was good at using my networking even back then. So that's always in my wheelhouse. So yeah, like that is where I'm at. But the good thing about wrestling is that there's everybody, like you said, it's a crowded space, but there's plenty of room for everybody, because there's so many wrestlers. There's so much that's out there and I've always been at the impression and mindset that like the more of us that are out there putting out content, the better it is for all of us. You know, like that's more stuff for us to cover if there's more people out there getting good interviews, and there's more people with good podcasts, and there's people with good websites that are bringing out like good stories and good content. So like, you know, the more the merrier for me, man. I'm never one to be not supportive of other colleagues and stuff. Like that's because we all aggregate news. You know, I mean, that's just kind of what everybody does in this business. And like they do it on ESPN and all the big things. Like they're all covering everybody else's stuff. So
right,
well, out there covering, that's just more for us to cover. So I mean, I'm all about it, man. It's a crowded space, but more people should be out here doing it, because all that really does is just it helps us out in the long run, in my mind.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. But you know, with this in particular, when it comes to pro wrestling musings, it's why I really like having you here to talk about all this, because you know we do focus more on the analysis piece of it rather than the news, the breaking news part of it. So I like to hear your analysis of the news that you have worked really hard to break and write about. So when it comes to, I mean, obviously we're talking about Bryan and Punk, but when it comes to all the things that you've covered with AEW and all the things that you've talked about with AEW, for example, the Arthur Ashe show, right around the time that you were breaking the Daniel Bryan news, there was news breaking about there were 15,000 tickets or whatever the number was sold in a day for Arthur Ashe, and that was before there was an idea that Daniel Bryan was going to show up there. So when you are looking at breaking this kind of news and talking to the sources that you have and all these other things, what is the goal in the future? If AEW in the future is not going to have an issue selling tickets for facilities like that, what is the real goal that you've heard or that you would expect there to be?
I think I understand what you're asking. Like, so what? Hit me with that question one more time. I make sure I understand what you're trying to get out of me on this one. So, like, is it?
I want to know from your perspective, if you're looking forward, if ticket sales are not going to be an issue, what is the real goal here for AEW? What do they believe guys like Daniel Bryan, CM Punk can bring to the table, or what do you think they can bring to the table if it's not just ticket sales?
I think ticket sales obviously, but these guys are valuable. Like, they're gonna. How much more of these people are the young guys at AEW gonna learn under, like, having these guys around? They're really good. AEW is really good about they have all this talent that they've been bringing in for like Dark Elevation that they're developing. And it's having such. You got a future Hall of Famer, obviously Daniel Bryan. I wonder now that he left, what are the chances? How long before he actually gets acknowledged as a Hall of Famer by WWE? Which you never know with them, but he's obviously a Hall of Famer. No argument there. So you have that mind in your locker room, and WWE wanted him creatively in the back. So you have another mind creatively in the back that can help input these guys on characters and bounce stuff off people and come up and give a critique of a match. And that's what these guys do. And that's why, like, a lot of these indie guys that kind of get brought in before they get signed to the top 2-tier deals where so is all elite, when they're just doing they're just doing Dark and Dark Elevation and extra spots during Dynamite or whatever. Just talking to those guys, it's just having like a Christian walk up to him and give a wrestler a critique on a match. It means the world to these guys. Do you know what I mean? To have think about, how would you feel if you're just coming up, this is pretty much your first break, and one of your heroes is in the back watching your match, and as soon as you come through the curtain, they have something to tell you about it. Mm-hmm. You can't take away that value from it at all. Like, so besides the fact they're going to be boosting your ticket sales, and obviously the buzz around it is like none other right now, so you're getting a lot more eyes and attention on your product. But you can't. What those names and those legends bring to your locker room is invaluable. You can't even put it priceless. You couldn't even begin to factor in what that's worth. Mm-hmm. And I think that's and yeah. These guys get to contribute in ways that they probably didn't get to before in other companies, because everybody in AEW they're really tight, man. These guys are like a family. They hang out. Everybody, when you go through the hotel, you see them all hanging out together in the lobby. They're all at after parties. So, these guys are, people get to learn. The learning tree is huge at AEW, and you can't take away that, like, that type of teaching that these guys have now. And that's, everybody I know that, like, has gone through the developmental with AEW or they have worked with QT and all these guys. It's just how much they've improved just since they've shown up is amazing. It's because they have such good, such input and such good ideas and people just bouncing stuff off of them. It's very good for wrestling to have that type of environment, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very visible as well. I remember when I first started watching AEW Dark, and you saw Red Velvet originally come in versus what she is now. She's a completely different wrestler, and you could see her week to week getting better. And that goes for a lot of the other people on Dark and Elevation as well. You can see them every week just getting that little bit better, doing more and more and more. And obviously that comes from learning in the back and getting that advice. So quick Another quick little question for you, Cassidy. So, obviously, you're a massive fan, and you have been for a very, very long time. So, gotta put you on the spot here. What is your favorite match, and what's your favorite pay-per-view? Very interested to know.
Man, all right, guys. I grew up WCW. That was a WCW kid. WWF didn't come around where I was as a kid. Here in North Carolina in the mountains, like I'm in Asheville. So I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. So here, the closest thing WWF would come would be maybe every now and then we'd get a Winston-Salem or a Charlotte or Raleigh show once every 4 or 5 years. But I grew up WCW, the house show circuits here. Every couple months. That was me. So my favorite match is probably, and it's the one that Sting and Flair when I was a kid, man. That's what got me into wrestling. Clash of Champions when I was 4 years old. And I remember just being hooked and just enthralled with watching Ric Flair and Sting wrestle on TBS when I was a kid. So that's my favorite match. Even though it's like there's a lot better matches that have happened. You know what I mean? But that's my favorite still because that's my first memory of wrestling is Clash of Champions 1, Sting and Flair. There was another part of that too. Sorry, what was the other fourth? Favorite match.
Favorite pay-per-view.
Favorite pay-per-view is probably, and this is a weird one for me, not weird, but ECW. ECW Barely Legal is my favorite pay-per-view of all time. I always watch that show, early ECW shows when I'm just bored, looking for background noise on like the network or Peacock or whatever the hell we use now. I would always just throw on early ECW, and I think I've seen Barely Legal probably more than any other ECW or wrestling pay-per-view. I think it was just too is like that was one of those special moments as well. I think that pay-per-view that changed wrestling a lot too. I think that's one of the reasons I like that show is because that was the first time anybody that wasn't Vince or Turner, got a pay-per-view deal, and especially one that had such the buzz about it as that show. And then you got to see so many stars get plucked from that pay-per-view, and then go end up on the Monday Night Wars later. So that was always the one that I think is my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny to me that wrestling has such a nostalgia aspect to it, almost more than anything else. I grew up a massive sports fan, and I still am, but my wrestling fandom has come much more recently in my life. And one of the things that's blown me away is the level of nostalgia and the level of knowledge of history that so many fans possess in pro wrestling. It's not just people like you that do this for a living. It's, most fans have this just incredible knowledge of history, and there's an entire industry around, retro reviews and classic pay-per-views and all these things that we know so well as wrestling fans. So, I got to ask you from your perspective, when we look back in 15, 20 years at the origins of AEW, at the beginnings of AEW, what are some of the things from your perspective that we're going to remember about this time in wrestling?
This time, like wrestling right now, it literally reminds me of like the late 90s, when there's, you don't know who's going to show up where, and you have all this like excitement and more internet buzz. Like that was the big thing is like, I think the internet changed wrestling more than anything else, and ECW lived and died by the internet basically, like that's what got them their internet following is what made them have the chance to get on pay-per-view. And that's kind of how it is now. Like AEW's fans I would say are mostly internet, like that. They're your internet smart marks. That's AEW's demographic. And I don't think there's any argument there from anybody, so you get those type of fans, and I got distracted. I lost my train of thought. What was the question to begin with? I lost my train of thought, bro. I got offside. I can't remember where I was going with it.
Yeah, we're talking about things that people will remember from this era in wrestling.
There, and it reminds me of that, and it's just that whole like who might show up when, and like the surprises, and then like the jumping of ship and all that stuff. And so people look back at AEW where it came from first, like that, like we talked about All In, that show, the beta run of like, can we make this happen? That was a very, very, I was at that, and that was a very, very good show that a lot of people probably flies under their radar. And man, Stephen Amell, that match with him and Christopher Daniels, that's one of my favorite matches in recent memory, probably in the last 15 years. I love that match because you get a guy that's not a wrestler by trade. He was his third ever match, and he's an actor. But like that guy went out there, and if you just showed that to somebody that didn't know who he was or didn't think they didn't know he was an actor, they would be like, "Damn, that guy's not bad for him." They think he was a wrestler. So like things like that, and their ability to pull in him and do that, I remember things like that. Those are the things that I remember is like somebody that came in to out of their comfort zone, so he ventured into this is our world, you know what I mean? Even though he likes it and is a fan of it and has watched it, this is not what he's not a trained wrestler. He's not done this ever really, other than just the little bit he did rolling around with WWE with Cody and stuff like that. So like, those are the things I remember, is being able to pull off something like that and doing it well enough to where you didn't like embarrass yourself or embarrass the people involved, or like, can anybody really say anything negative about that match? And things like that, I think about this time period is really good. Like, what else can we do like that that's a little bit different that you do well? And AEW is good, man. Tony is one of the most creative people ever. You know what I mean? And it's because he's such a fan. Like I said before, man, the dude's got notebooks and notebooks just full of fantasy bookings that he's done since he was a kid. So he's got like storylines and ideas kicking around. Like, he's a little bit younger than me. He's like mid-30s. So, I'd love to see what else he's got in that notebook, man. Like I don't know. The bookings and stuff, like, it just got very mundane and everything kind of got repetitive and everything was the same always and always and always. So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of surprise. And like, I can't wait to see what happens Wednesday night with Gage and Jericho, like that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And like things like that, like him bringing in Nick Gage, even though these one-offs and stuff like that, but like it's great for the fans. Like we love this, like you would never see like WWE have that, bring in somebody for a one-off like that and make them look good. Like, I definitely don't expect Nick Gage to win, but I know that it's not going to make him look any weaker. They're not going to devalue him just to make Jericho look better,
Yeah.
Things
well,
like
and if anything, it would make Jericho look worse. I mean, what was amazing to me is that when Nick Gage debuted, you had all these people that knew who he was and just reacted to his name. It's like, it's amazing that this guy who, wrestles consistently in front of like a few hundred people, who's this deathmatch wrestler. It's a niche within a niche that Nick Gage occupies. And yet you have all these people that knew who he was and reacted viscerally to hearing that he's going to make an appearance. Like, I think a big reason why AEW has earned a lot of the trust and fan support that they have is because they do take things like that seriously. And they don't make people like Nick Gage look like a joke just because the mainstream wrestling fan might not know who he is.
Yeah, exactly. And they're smart enough to be able to capitalize off bringing him in because they know that like there's enough people of their fan base that's going to know who he is, that it's going to be big enough for them to care and tune into, you know what I mean? Like, and they're not just bringing him in just to how can we use you to make our guy to progress his story and make him better. Like, it's going to elevate Nick Gage's stock. And, there's, who knows, like they might see, like, there's a lot of opportunities that people take and they're getting AEW that they use to get jobs out of, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's what's great. Like Eddie Kingston, he had a one-off and he turned it into a career, or turned it into a job. Ricky Starks, his match was supposed to be a one-off, and now look at him, he's FTW champion and he's one of the best things on it. So like, you never know what this could do for Gage. Like, I think that's exciting too. That's one of the best things about this era we're in now, is like there's things like that where, because I mean, if you knew Nick Gage was coming in for like a WWE night, you pretty much know that that's the only time you're going to see him, and you're probably not going to get much out of it. But you never know here with AEW. It's fun, man. It's one of the fun. It's such a different like business model that Tony uses for his company that it's very interesting and very fun for a wrestling fan because, like, you're so used to, as a wrestling fan, like, okay, this guy's not one of ours. He's an outsider, so you know what to expect. But you really don't, because like they'll surprise you and have one of their guys beat somebody that you didn't expect them to beat, and kind of like the title swap. Like I didn't really expect Lance Archer to beat Moxley last week.
Right.
And progress another storyline with New Japan guys like that. That was kind of interesting to me. So there's things like that like, all right, they constantly keep me constantly surprising me. And that's the thing too in wrestling, to be surprised is very rare nowadays, especially being.
I was gonna say, especially in your line of work, it would be.
Yeah. So there's like a lot of things. It's like, oh, good. Like that still keeps me guessing, and still makes me. I like being like fooled and not knowing stuff too. That's always good, and they really good about that too.
Well,
they let a little bit out, like a little bit comes out sometimes. Like I always wonder if they do that on purpose. You know what I mean? Like to where a little bit comes out, but then the stuff they're able to keep, it's like there's just enough that gets out that keeps you interested, and then there's always a little bit that you don't see coming. That's like, they got me with a new surprise too. So I think they're good about that. They know how to work the internet. Like that was what Paul E was good at in the 90s, man, with ECW, is he worked the internet. He knew how to use the internet to benefit like his product and show, and the buzz and the talk and all that. So that's kind of what's happening again. Like if you look at it, I think that's great.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I've really enjoyed talking to you, because the perspective you bring on this is not something that we usually hear really from anyone, but it's great to hear someone who is so professional when it comes to things like this, because I really think that there is I don't want to say a reputation, but a belief that, people like you that do wrestling journalism are, you act a certain way or you feel a certain way. And so, to listen to the way that you actually approach things like this, and the degree of professionalism that you take with this, I hope that a lot of people are realizing that, wrestling journalism actually brings some value, that there's really something here with a lot of people who take it seriously. So I really appreciate you bringing your own perspective to this, as a perspective that none of us really on Pro Wrestling Musings could have. So I really appreciate it. And what I want to ask you now is hopefully we've gotten some new fans of yours from this podcast, at least I would hope. So is there anything coming down the pike that you are really excited about from your end?
I mean, just like what I've talked about, I got a bunch of shows to go and travel and cover, and that's always fun, because we'll do it another time. Anytime you guys want me on, I'll be more than happy to come on and just bullshit with you guys. But I get good stories. Numerous people colleagues have made the joke often that, like, man, Cassidy, you're like the Hunter S. Thompson of wrestling journalism, which that's the best compliment I've ever had, because like I have fun, man. I enjoy this, and like I go out, I'll drink, I'll catch a buzz, I'll have a good time. So I get it, like not a lot of people do that, but like, man, I have fun doing this, and I usually get a lot of good stories. Story time with Cassidy is a very interesting. It can go for hours. You'll hear some stuff that's like, holy shit, I never expected that kind of story. So we'll get into those one day. That's my favorite part about this, is just traveling and meeting all these guys and hanging out and just cultivating friendships and relationships with these guys, and it's fun. So that's really what I got coming on. Is I hope that I have some good stories and some good news coming out of these trips I got the next couple weeks to some shows, and I'll try to keep everybody up to date with what's going on as best I can.
Well, we'd love to have you back on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast sometime. So hopefully we can make that happen. But thank you so much again, man, for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure for us. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's my honor. It's my pleasure. This has been a wild ride the last few weeks. I've done more podcasts in the last week than I had in years. And like you said, hopefully, more people. I've made some new fans, but same goes for you, man. Like hopefully you got some new listeners too, just because of this week and what's been happening. So anytime you guys want me on, I'll be more than happy to come on and talk wrestling with you. And I'm going to throw you guys a little off the record scoop between us that I couldn't write about when we get done, just because I enjoy talking to you guys so much. So I'll throw you guys a little bone just for you off the record.
You know what? We always appreciate that. You can check out Cassidy Haynes over on bodyslam.net, also on Twitter, and I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly. Is it Cass Hole with three O's?
You nailed it with 3 O's, man. Because I always like, man, you're an asshole, but you're our asshole. So when I come down, my name's Cassidy, so it just kind of fit that I'm. But you couldn't never do usernames back in the day. If I tried to do Casshole with 1 O, they're like, sorry, there's a bad word in that, and you're not allowed to use it. And I'm like, damn it. So I just added a couple extra O's, and it's been like that. That's been my username since I was like in high school. So yeah, that is who I am. Casshole with 3 O's, CASSHOOOLE. That's where you can find. And that you can find me on pretty much any of the social media gimmicks with that username. If you search Facebook, you'll find me. If you search Snapchat, you'll find me. Instagram, you'll find me. Like, so pretty much if you find a Casshole with 3 O's out there, there's a good chance it's me.
I appreciate the commitment to the gimmick on that, honestly.
Yeah, live it. You got to stick to it, man.
Exactly. Well, thanks again and again. Bodyslam.net, Casshole, all those other places. And you know what? This is a Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, so I can't leave without asking Anthony to tell people where they can find him. So, Anthony, if you would, please.
You can find me at Anthony Down Under. And today I've also got to put over, we do a regular article called The Roundtable. We actually did a roundtable based on the Daniel Bryan news, focusing on, I guess, what we think should happen, whether or not it's good news and everything like that. I guess a little bit of fantasy booking. So the roundtable normally involves about 5 or 6 different writers giving their own little perspective about it. So you can go read that over at prowrestlingmusings.com as well, or go onto our Twitter and you'll see that there. I actually put in my stuff on there and I'm as well, so I contributed to that one this week. So yeah, go and give that a read as well. The roundtable is a very fun article to read because, like I said, you get multiple different people's perspectives all at once.
Well, thank you for putting that over because I absolutely agree with you. It's one of my favorite reads every week, so I absolutely believe that people should check that out over on ProWrestlingMusings.com. I've been Griff from GA. You can check out my personal YouTube channel over at General Admission Wrestling. And while you're there, why not check out the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel? We always have cool stuff going up. So give that a subscribe if you have not already. And you know what? I didn't start today with a movie quote, so we're going to end today with a movie quote. And this one, I'm actually not going to modify this one because I think that it's actually apropos to what we're talking about. Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. So if you can name that movie, please do. But once again, big thank you to Cassidy Haynes. Drop us a subscribe on YouTube, 5-star review, Spotify, Apple, all that stuff. You know what the deal is. But thank you so much for joining us on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. We'll see you in just a few days to talk about Dynamite once again. The news never stops here, folks. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you guys. We'll see you next time.